Hi everybody, my name is Lisa Loftman and I'm the facilitator of the Mindful Self-Compassion class, which began today, May 16th, at Michigan State University. And in the process of the first class, we had some folks that were on Zoom with us, and about 20 minutes in, we lost connection to the Zoom room. And as a result, those folks weren't able to finish the class. And I didn't really know how to fix it in the moment, so I just decided to finish the class in person, and then decided that I would come back this afternoon and re-record it, or just record myself going through the same content, so that I could send a link out to everybody, so that whether or not you were in the class today and got disconnected, or you just weren't able to come, this would allow you to choose to watch this video and then be up to speed with everybody at the next class, which is next Wednesday, May 23rd. So I'm just going to sort of start over and try to help introduce you to the class and to this concept of mindful self-compassion. And I just really am increasingly clear that mindful self-compassion is a skill that is just essential to high-performing work. The ability to hold yourself accountable in a loving and supportive way actually gets you back to effectiveness sooner. So this class is one of many classes that I teach that is about resilience. I'm a resilience trainer here on campus, and I'm very much about people being able to navigate circumstances more effectively. So one of the definitions I like about resilience is that it's the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances, or in some cases, dramatically challenging circumstances, perhaps like we all experienced last semester here at MSU. So what does that mean, core purpose and integrity? It really means that you're able to respond to the circumstances with your best self, your value-guided self. Integrity really is about lining up with your values, and to know your core purpose, it helps if you've done some thinking about what those values are. So we're looking for value-guided behavior when things go awry. It's one of the ways I think about resilience. Another definition of resilience is the capacity to bounce back from misfortune, disruptive change, and failure. That bounceability, that ability to kind of like pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and kind of get started again, is really essential to navigating all the challenges we face in our work and personal lives. And that capacity to bounce back actually increases when we're being kind to ourselves. Not kind like letting ourselves off the hook, but being kind with like loving accountability, where we're going to try to help ourselves stay calm and grounded and take responsibility. So that bounceability is very much impacted by the way we treat ourselves. I also talked about resilience being kind of like a resting place. Like you can rest in your innate health and well-being, even if you don't know what to do next, or even if you're waiting for an answer, or in times of great uncertainty. The ability to rest in the not yet known and sort of wait for yourself to have a good idea, that ability to rest in that is also impacted by how you're treating yourself. And when we're yelling and screaming at ourselves, we're not resting in the kind of state of mind that can actually help us have a good idea. I was talking to somebody recently who was working on their comps and realized that they weren't going to, they had the thought that they weren't going to finish on time, and then they just started, being really effortful and trying to control themselves and yelling at themselves and then berating themselves. And what they needed to do was calm down, because when we're calm, we can access what we know. When our fight-flight goes off, our prefrontal cortex goes offline, which is our logic center. So literally, we can't access what we know. And so being able to rest in this buoyancy, catch our breath, can actually clear that out so we can re-engage our processing center, and we can remember what we were writing about or what we were saying. So there's a direct benefit to treating yourself in a way that helps you stay calm and helps you rest in the not yet known. This is one of my favorite definitions of resilience. It's from Sheryl Sandberg's book called Option B, which she wrote with a man named Adam Grant. Sheryl lost her husband suddenly. They were on vacation, and he went to work out in the gym, and he died. And I like the book Option B because it's really about the intersections of resilience training and grieving. And so a friend of hers said, I get that option A was you and Dave raising these kids together, but option A isn't going to happen anymore. I promise to help you kick the heck out of option B, but you can't hang on to option A. And so through her own learning, this is a definition Sheryl came up with, that resilience is the speed and strength of our response to adversity. It's how quickly do we go from, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, to this is what I'm going to do about it, or this is what I can do about it, or this is how I want to move forward. In acceptance commitment theory, which is one of the theories that we base our resilience training on, the 2-sentence summary of acceptance commitment theory is, it is what it is. Given that it is what it is, who do I want to be, and how do I want to move forward? And again, self-compassion helps you get your bearings with self-soothing language and self-soothing gestures to get yourself grounded enough to be able to ask yourself that question even. Sheryl and Adam also say that resilience comes from deep within us. All right, we want to access the resiliency that we already have. We want to realize the health and well-being that we already have. And resilience also comes from support around us. And that fits into our discussion today because when we get support from other people, it's called empathy. I can be having a hard time, like messing up a Zoom class, and somebody can care about that and can care that I'm having a hard time, and I feel supported. When I care for myself, it's self-empathy. I'm providing empathy for me. And one of the reasons why that's so important is no matter where you go, there you are. And sometimes you're the only one there. And so sometimes the only one who can provide empathy for you is you. And what we know is empathy is the antidote to shame. So when people are feeling shame triggered from a mistake or a failure or an upset, or they just do something out of alignment with their values and they feel bad about it, empathy is what helps that dissipate so that we can get to good action. So I like that definition as well. I just wanted to share for a moment the blueprint that we use here at Health4U to talk about resiliency. And so I'm just going to go through this and show you. So the foundational, very first theory that it's kind of based on is called the 3 principles. And these are just 3 core ideas that describe how human beings create their own moment-to-moment experience of reality. Most people don't know about the principles or haven't been taught about the principles, and so we tend to have an outside-in view of reality. We tend to think that our circumstances create our moment-to-moment experience. We know that's true because it's in our language, like, he's on my last nerve, she's driving me crazy, they're pushing my buttons, I'll be okay if I can get this task done, I'll be okay if, I'll be okay when, if this wasn't happening, then I would be calm, I have to feel stressed because, so much of our language lets us know that we're more outside in than is really very helpful. And so these principles help you understand how moment to moment you're actually creating your experience from the inside out. Your circumstances are happening and you're connected to life energy and bringing to life a thought through your sensory system that's creating your reality, which is why the same situation can be happening, like the moment we lost everybody today. My first thought was, oh no, this is terrible. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? and I had a degree of stress about that. And then a moment later, I had a different thought of, there's nothing I can do about it right now. I don't know how. And when I accepted that thought, a new thought came, re-record it later. So I had 3 different experiences of the same exact event very quickly because I'm creating it from the inside out. The reason why it's helpful to know that is if I'm seeing that I'm creating a situation that's causing me to in that moment, it was causing stress, but it was also causing me to not be effective with the people in the room. When I noticed that, I could let it go and release it, come back to a fresh view, and then have a new thought. So all of our work is kind of based on the foundations of the 3 principles. And if you're interested in doing any more learning about that this summer, you could go to the 3 Principles Movies, 3principlesmovies.com. The word 3 is spelled out, THREE, principlesmovies.com. And there's a bunch of learning you can do through that website. The next theory that's layered into our blueprint is called acceptance commitment theory. It's sometimes referred to as the psychological flexibility model, and it really is about helping you become less rigid, controlling, anxious, easily upset, reactive, defensive, because it teaches skills that are very in alignment with the principles, kind of like brings those principles to life in a really more practical way. But it teaches you how to have like instead of trying to control your thinking and your circumstances, you're just starting to change your attachment to your thoughts, and so that you're not so tripped up by the very first thoughts that you have about a situation. Typically, our first thoughts through aren't our best thoughts. And yet, if we go with our first thoughts through because we don't know any better, then we're going to be more reactive than we need to be. And so that's the next theory that's layered in there. The one that comes after that is shame resilience. Oh, by the way, if you are interested in doing some learning on acceptance commitment theory, you can watch some videos that I made, which would take you, give you an overview and then take you through 6 core skills of that model. And you can find that set of videos on our website. The easiest way to find it is to go to the MSU main webpage, and in the toolbox or the search box, type in the word toolbox, and it should bring up a page that's called the Emotional Resilience Video Toolbox. If you click on that, you should see 8 different articles. They're numbered 1 through 8. Go to episode number 1 and click on that, and it should help you get going. In article 1, there is a PDF that you would want to print, and you'll need that printed out as you watch the first video. Shame resilience, if you want to get a start on that, you can watch the very first TED Talk that Brene Brown did. So if you Google Brene Brown 2000 and TED Talk, you'll get to the shame resilience introduction. I will also be teaching classes on all of these theories over the course of time through both Health4U and also in partnership with Human Resources Organizational Professional Development Office. Shame resilience fits in here because what we know is when we're experiencing shame, we don't function at our best. When we get shame triggered, we tend to act in ways that aren't lined up with our core values, therefore makes us not very resilient. The more you understand the emotion of shame and know when you get triggered, the more you can separate from your shame reaction and have a value-guided response. The other reason shame resilience fits into this discussion about mindful self-compassion is that shame is not helpful to positive behavior, whether the person shaming you is somebody outside of you, like your supervisor or a parent or a coach, or if it's the voice inside your head. So shame resilience helps you build better boundaries around shame that other people are bringing to you. It also helps you interrupt the self-shaming you might be doing. In class today, I asked people to think about a supervisor or a coach or a parent or somebody in their life that has a leadership role over you. And to write, if you imagine writing their name down on an index card, I might ask you to go up to this wall in my office where there's a continuum. On one side, there's a piece of paper that says toxic supervisor. This person's not helpful to you. They're critical, demanding, challenging. They try to motivate you by yelling at you, maybe calling you names, berating you. They're really hard on you. They say they're being hard on you because they want you to do better, but they're using really harsh language and criticism, and they're demoralizing you. On the other side of the continuum is, a healthier supervisor model, which is a shame-resilient person who, still wants you to do the best, still needs you to perform, but holds you accountable, but does so with love and grace. They are firm but fair. When you make a mistake, they help you process how it feels to make a mistake, and then they're about problem solving and doing better next time. So if you could take that supervisor's name and put it on a continuum, do you know where you would put it? And in class today, a lot of people were like, yeah, I know where I would put that. And then I asked them to think of that inner supervisor, that voice, that predominant voice in your head. And if you were to write your name on that card, where would you put you on that continuum? Is the way that you talk to yourself more like that healthy, vibrant, encouraging coach or supervisor, or is it more that berating, toxic, shaming, demoralizing, harsh, critical supervisor? A lot of people in the room today kind of can acknowledge with a head nod that they would probably put themselves on the more toxic side of that. This class is really intended to try to help you see how that's never helpful to you. It's not helpful when somebody else shames you, and it's not helpful when you shame yourself. So we're going to want to interrupt that behavior so that you can, instead of shaming yourself, you can tend to yourself and then hold yourself accountable for taking care of the problem and for moving forward in a useful, helpful, value-guided way. So shame resilience is a big part of the discussion. And then mindfulness is, it's mindful self-compassion. Mindfulness is really about witnessing, noticing, witnessing without judging what's happening. So the way mindfulness fits in here is mindful self-compassion includes the ability to acknowledge and notice what we're feeling and to allow ourselves to feel it without either ignoring our feelings, resisting or resenting them, or without getting swept away and lathered up inside of them and having our feelings kind of own our reaction. So mindfulness is really the ability to come to the present moment and open up. And so that kind of connects here. Those 4 core pieces of our blueprint would actually be kind of dangerous if we just kept it because all of those are at the personal level. It's like what's going on in an individual human being. But we aren't all walking around just in individual little containers. We're actually engaging in a larger system with policies and rules, and so a big part of our model is also helping people understand that we are all connected to different systems, and those different systems have different power and privileges depending on who we are and what our identity association is. And so, it's a one layer of understanding what resilience is it's important for us to understand how we might be being disadvantaged by a system in order to figure out how best to navigate it. I want us all to be working to make the system more fair and equitable. And also there are times when there's a power dynamic happening that's impacting me. And while I get to create my own experience of that circumstance, it is important to notice that there's a power difference. The example I used in class today is that I could be talking with a person and they could appear depressed. But when I continue to talk to them, I can hear how they're being systematically targeted by, I would say that it's a female academic and by a male colleague or a male, a male chair or something like that. That's actually less depression and it's more oppression. And so as a helper, helping somebody see that struggle, but also understanding that they're moment to moment having a reaction to that, can help people have the deepest, wisest reaction, including work towards change about the system of power and privileges. So I just can't talk about any of these things without having it in the context of it's not the same playing field for everyone, and there's, personal, interpersonal, institutional, and cultural differences where the system advantages some of us and not others. And then somehow I lost my page here. What happened here? This is the area, the intersection that we're mostly focusing on today. And that's where mindful self-compassion kind of fits in. So I hope that gives you the big picture understanding of what we're talking about here. I just wanted to set everything that we're talking about in that context. I often talk about the fact that I can now, I've been doing this work so long that I can talk about a framework for building resilience that actually has just 6 words to it. And so my 6 words are acknowledge, honor, and release, so you can relax, reflect, and resolve. This is a really important set of words here because it's a framework. So when something upsetting or problematic happens and I'm in an upset, part of it's how quickly can I go from that upset back to value-guided steady behavior. And so the first thing that has to happen is I have to acknowledge what occurred. Just simply acknowledge it. Kind of, this is it is what it is. I wasn't the host of the meeting and we lost everybody. And I can honor that. Oh, I feel disappointed in that. I feel responsible for that. I feel like I let people down. That actually all happened. And I'm going to acknowledge and honor that. It's like, oh, okay, that doesn't feel good. And then I want to be willing to let it go. Just be willing to let it go. And the reason why I'm willing to let it go is I know that staying in that doesn't actually help me get to value-guided action. So when I become willing to fully acknowledge it and honor it, I'm not resisting or resenting it or the feelings it created. I've kind of made space for it, took a big releasing breath, relaxed back into who I was before that happened, and then reflected on what to do next, which was A, finish the class in person, and B, come back here and make this recording. And then I resolved to do that, and now I'm in fact doing that right before your eyes. So these 6 words, I really want you to try on when you're having a frustrating, upset moment. Can you look to these 6 words to help you move from the upsetting moment to this other place to be? Self-compassion really is involved in the first 3. That if we're not willing to be, if we're really harsh with ourselves, we'll try to even deny that anything's going on. When we're not harsh with ourselves, we're more likely to just say, okay, this is what I did. If I'm going to give myself grace, I'm more willing to acknowledge I made a mistake. So I'm going to acknowledge it and then honor the feelings by even asking myself, what am I feeling? And caring about that. That's self-empathy. I'm going to acknowledge what I'm feeling and care that I'm feeling it, and then tend to myself about it rather than criticize myself about it. The releasing is really the mindful part of, in that moment I might become aware of how my cough is in my chest today. I might become aware of how I'm sitting on my chair. I'm just going to release and come back to this present moment. Okay, that happened, but I'm here now, and then let me wonder what I can do, which is the relax, reflect, resolve. So I want you to try that on just because I'm curious about how that starts to help interrupt. And I want you to notice that you can't get to relax, reflect, resolve unless you do the first part. I shared in group today, and it's with my whole heart that I believe that after the Nassar trial happened, A lot of folks on campus wanted to get to relax, reflect, resolve. But we, as an institution, weren't able to do that, and the public wasn't going to let us do that until we actually acknowledged, honored, and released. And that's when it showed up on our website, and people became engaged in being willing to hear the horror of everything that occurred. When we were able to acknowledge it and honor it, then we were on the right path. I was sharing that you can acknowledge and honor something, but not release it. I shared that my mom lost my dad when she was 49. He was 50, and he died. And for about 7 years, she acknowledged it and honored it on a really regular basis, and she was just stuck inside of it. And it wasn't until a moment when her own health was in jeopardy that she really kind of let the experience of that go. And I think that she didn't release it because in her mind it felt like if she released it, then she stopped caring about him, which is actually common related to grief. But what I'm wanting you to see is that when we acknowledge something and honor it and fully care about the feelings of it, when we get ready to let it go, when we become willing to release it, we're not releasing it so that we can not care. We're releasing it so that we can relax, reflect, resolve. So self-compassion is really letting yourself acknowledge it, which means you don't have to put any effort into denying it or resisting it or resenting it or whatever. You could just say, it is what it is. And then you can acknowledge the feeling, honor the feeling, and then become willing to let that go. See, experiences are supposed to kind of come and go. And so when I have a moment of shame, if I'm willing to honor it, yep, I feel shame triggered, and then I become willing to let it go, that's when I can kick into a better place. So self-compassion is going to help you honor and release. And that's really where the road hits there. The main objectives for this particular course, I'll put my glasses on so I can read them, is to help you build your emotional resilience. That's what's most important, is helping you be more resilient and psychologically flexible. And when I asked people today if they had heard of psychological flexibility, this idea that you can intentionally become more flexible in your thinking and the way you're processing things, most people hadn't heard of that. We think of like going to a personal trainer or physical therapy to increase our physical flexibility, and we can get why that would be helpful, but yet we're not actually thinking about becoming more psychologically flexible very often. I want you to understand what self-compassion is and why it's a critical skill, not just in your personal world, but for your work effectiveness, because it helps you process those emotions more effectively. And this idea that we shouldn't be emotional at work is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, because you cannot separate a human from their emotions. Every person on this campus right now, no matter what they're doing, is having an emotion and an emotional experience. And that's where we have emotions 24/7. And self-compassion helps you kind of go with and navigate your emotions more effectively. And it turns out that leaders who are able to effectively honor and process anger, disappointment, insecurity, upset, feelings of feeling threatened, any of those, shame, any of those, the ability to actually process and release them actually means other people don't have to be negatively impacted by those unprocessed emotions. When we don't process our emotions, we tend to stockpile them, excuse me, hold them, accumulate them, and then, as I said earlier, until we have one of our jack-in-the-box moments where we've got this anger and stress and frustration, we have not acknowledged, honored, and actively released it, so it's building up kinetically, and then somebody says something and it's like the last few bars of jack-in-the-box song, and bam, we pop out and we go off on somebody that doesn't really deserve all of that. And so it's a critical work effectiveness skills because it helps us be responsible for our emotions and to use them to work better, more efficiently, and to be higher quality coworkers and leaders. I also want to dispel some of the myths about self-compassion, because culturally it's sort of seen as touchy-feely crap that is a waste of time. And if we don't help you see how that's not true, then you won't be willing to develop a self-compassion practice, and we all need you to do that. So we're going to spend some time next time in class 2 talking about that. You'll also complete a self-compassion assessment, a self-compassion self-assessment. If you're interested in doing that sooner rather than later, if you Google self-compassion self-assessment, it'll take you right to a link where you can do Dr. Kristen Neff's self-compassion assessment. If you do that on your phone, you might want to take a screenshot of your numbers, because I will be asking you for those later. You won't be sharing those with anybody in the class, but they're for your own learning purposes. I'll be explaining what the assessment means and how to think about the different pieces of the assessment. We'll do that. And then I'll introduce you to the 3 main components, which are self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Again, mindfulness is really being mindful with those emotions, not ignoring them and not getting swept away with them. That's the way she talks about mindfulness in this model. And then the last one is to help you learn some basic practices that'll help you be more self-compassionate with yourself more often. These are going to include starting to develop some self-soothing language, some comforting language, and also some self-soothing gesture. Something that you can do when you're startled or upset or having a reaction, something you can do to help calm yourself down. One person's is kind of just opening up their hand. Mine is often that I'll tap my chest, and I realized after a while that I was doing that in the same rhythm that I used to burp my babies, who are not babies anymore, but it would be like, and when I do that, I'm like trying actively to help myself calm down. Turns out, when somebody else is upset and you try to calm them down, you actually calm yourself down too. It's called the mammalian caregiving response. When you provide care, you calm down, and it helps you come off of a stress alert. It helps you get back to your clearest thinking. Turns out, research shows that when you actually turn that care to yourself, you get like double benefit, because you're being comforted, but you're also the comforter, and that will help you get grounded quicker, even more quickly. And so we're going to be practicing how to help yourself calm down, and we'll do that after we try to help you see why it's so critical that you help yourself calm down, and that screaming and yelling and berating yourself and harming yourself. I'll even show you a video of a person so upset with themselves that they literally punched themselves in the face as a way to, get better behavior next. It doesn't work. It's actually counterproductive. When you're shaming yourself or abusing yourself, you're actually, contaminating the place in you that's capable of good change. And even if it worked a little, it works at such a high cost. And why would we do that if we can do it differently and get a positive outcome without all the wear and tear and damage, up to and including hurting yourself physically? So that's kind of where we're headed with the class. The hope is that you're going to increase your ability to have self-compassion, and that's going to help you improve your work performance while protecting your health and well-being. I often say that I want people to be at the intersection of healthy and high-performing. I don't think it's good for us to demand our high performance of ourselves long-term without caring for ourselves. It's just not sustainable, and we shouldn't be treating each other like that either. That we should be thinking about healthy and high performing, and how can we work together to be high performing with the least amount of physical, emotional, and mental energy drain or suffering. Most people are their worst enemy. People tell me all the time, I'm harder on myself than anybody else. I'm my worst enemy. We're going to try to get at why do you do that? Why do you think being the worst person you could possibly be to yourself is a good idea? So we're going to try to help you move from that to become your best friend, your best mentor, your best inner guide, or your best inner counselor. Because, I tell people all the time, like, that sometimes people say, like, I wish you could be with me, Lisa. You would help me remember these things. And like, I want people to be able to help themselves remember. And when we help ourselves calm down, we can actually be that wise inner supervisor. Whenever my inner supervisor is compassionate and accountable, I actually get over mistakes more quickly. I procrastinate less. I drag stuff around less. I feel less guilty. I get to that action more quickly. And then I can let it go. It's hard to let go of something that you haven't actually addressed. It's funny, when we get really angry at somebody, or get really angry, it often prolongs our action. Sometimes anger absolutely fuels beautiful action. Anger is actually a misunderstood emotion, I think. But when we get angry, sometimes we're all about the bluster of the anger, and then we actually don't do anything about the problem. And I also talked today about the fact that learning to be self-compassionate, for some of us, it actually feels like we're reparenting ourselves. You have to slow down and start to interrupt this really unhelpful, negative, critical parent voice in our head. If we had that kind of voice, we may think that that's the only option. In fact, my commitment to self-compassion has been happening since 2005, when I was facilitating a small group here in town. And we were reading the book, the Self-Compassion book, and this one woman asked, best question of the year, she said, is it possible to hold somebody accountable without being harsh? And in her experience, she had never been held accountable without somebody being harsh. But it really was a fascinating new idea for her, that you could actually hold somebody accountable without being cruel and vindictive and scary and startling. Turns out it's actually the better way. What is self-compassion? It's extending compassion to yourself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, or general suffering. I'm saying general suffering because, while it's helpful to have self-compassion when you blow it and you make a mistake and you mess something up, it's also helpful to have compassion where something happens to you, something unfortunate or unfair, and helping yourself move through that with compassion is also very important. Self-compassion is also thought of as being as kind and helpful to yourself as you would be to your best friend, your child, your trusted colleague on your best day, when you were really rested and grounded and at your best. How does that, your best humanity, how does that respond to things? We'd like you to start being able to give that to yourself more often. I know now how I did that, so let's see. Give me just a second here. Self-compassion is also called self-empathy, and this is how I want to break it down. Brene Brown uses this way to talk about empathy. It's based on the work of Teresa Wiseman, who is a nursing scholar. This is in Brene Brown's curriculum called Connections, and also in her book, I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't. That's got a great chapter on empathy. So empathy is really, there's 4 things you have to do. The first thing, I gave away my punchline there. The first thing I said is that empathy isn't something you have all the time. It's not like you should have it all the time. I'm a professional counselor, and I'm not empathetic all the time. When I shut my door and I step into a state of service with somebody, I'm stepping into a position of empathy with somebody. And we can all do that. We can all step into a moment of empathy with our kid. We can step into a moment of empathetic connection with a partner, but we're not going to be there all night. So how you do that is you enter into a conversation where you have the intention of staying out of judgment. It's a judgment is the most common and least recognized habit that humans have. We can see other people are judgmental, and we can even judge other judgmental people, but we don't see how our judgment kicks in. So you really want to be witnessing to see if you're receiving the person without judgment. That's the very first starting point. The second one is you really want to try to understand what they're saying, what they experience, and what they're saying by looking through their lenses. You really want to see it from the position of the person with that gender, that age, that's had that kind of a morning, that has this kind of thing on their desk. their role, not your role from a work context. If you want to see it from their position. So you're just trying to understand how they're seeing it. The next thing you want to do is just identify what this person is feeling. And all of us have had all of the feelings a person can be feeling. If they're confused, if they're overwhelmed, if they're scared, if they're startled, if they're angry. It's important to just like sort of touch the place in you that's also had that feeling. It doesn't mean you have to like bring that out, but you just want to be able to like understand that people feel those feelings, and you just want to be able to kind of name them. And then the next thing that you want to do is demonstrate care. You don't have to mirror back the content. You don't have to take the content seriously. You don't have to become responsible for fixing anything. You just want to identify their feeling and communicate to them that you care that they're feeling what they're feeling. You don't even have to agree with their assessment of the situation. To start with anyway, you just want to care that they're feeling what they're feeling. That's where that sentence, I wonder if you're feeling sad, or it's people trying to sort of are they getting that right? But you don't even have to do that. Just like one of the best empathy statements that I've heard is, wow, that's big. I don't even know what to say, but I want you to know I care. When you're just demonstrating care, you don't have to fix it or fade it or numb it or block it. You also don't need to sort of positive power it, like spiritual bypass, like, oh, it's going to be fine. You also don't need to take on their emotions. It's not about taking it all on and now you're carrying their emotions. It's about identifying what they're feeling and just caring for this human, right? So if that's empathy, and what we're talking about with self-compassion is self-empathy, then this empathy goal of allowing your emotions to be felt, honored, and released. That's what we're giving people, is the opportunity to feel their emotions, to speak them out, to honor them, and then hopefully to release them so that the next part can happen. Self-empathy is really those same things, but you got to pay attention to the purple words here. You have to stay out of judgment about yourself. And most of us are really bad at that. And so if you want to intentionally help yourself in a given moment when you've had a hard time, you have to witness yourself and give yourself a moment at least where you're not going to judge yourself. Instead, you're going to try to care for yourself. Less judgment, more care. So then you're going to try to understand what you're feeling and don't compare it right away to whether or not somebody else is feeling that. You want to just like understand why you might. So sometimes when I do something like in a moment of heat and conflict, when somebody asks me something, I may have a tendency to lie or make an excuse. I do this significantly less than I used to. It comes out of being raised in an alcoholic or otherwise traumatic family. Excuse my cold. And it's like getting startled and feeling like you got to protect yourself. It's like a porcupine gets startled and it puts out its quills. A lion can be that. And for 20 years, I've taken a very strong stance of not letting myself do that. And when I do it in a moment, trying to come back around and hold myself accountable. So the example I used in class for self-empathy is that in a moment where I was feeling badly about something, my sister asked me a question, and it was my nephew's graduation, and she asked me, she said, well, did you even send them a card? And even though I hadn't sent them a card, I said yes. And the second I said it, it was out there, but I was so shame-triggered I couldn't figure out what to do in the moment. And if I hadn't had self-compassion for myself, I probably would have never acknowledged to my sister that I did that. And she would have sent her son off to go look for the card from Aunt Lisa, and I would have carried it and felt bad about it. I still don't feel great that it happened, but I'm very proud of myself about how I tried to resolve it and respond to it, move away from it. So when I was actually in Kroger when I was having this shame reaction, and all I could just do is just sort of love myself through picking up those groceries and try to not scream at myself, berate myself, call myself names, just really had a self-soothing gesture and was just trying to breathe, just understanding. And it's to be really judgmental about the fact that I lied negates all of the history about my family of origin, how the roles happened, what happens for me sometimes when I feel like not a good enough sister. I'm still accountable for it, but I'm just understanding. It's sort of like understanding how it happened and what caused it to happen is part of how you resolve it. And so I could own it, but I needed to understand it without judgment. And so that's staying out of judgment and perspective taking. And then I just needed to understand what I was feeling. And then I needed to demonstrate care for myself that I was feeling what I was feeling. It doesn't mean it was okay, and I did need to take accountability and apologize. But before that, I just needed to make space for the fact that I was feeling all those awful emotions. I didn't ignore the emotions and try to block them out. If that was the case, I would have, since I was at Kroger, gone immediately to find an abundance of cake-like products that I would then really focus on and eat so that I wasn't thinking about what just happened. I didn't do that. I didn't harm myself in that way. I was able to let the emotions come and go. I didn't ignore them, but I also didn't get swept away by them. I mindfully grocery shopped. I stayed in the here and now. I grocery shopped. And then when I was able, I honored and allowed and noticed and released the emotions. That's self-empathy. And I just want you to start to notice when you're having a hard moment, when something doesn't go well, when you make a mistake, what's your inner supervisor? How is that treating you? And are you offering yourself any self-empathy? And if you can notice that you're not, can you think about the idea of doing these 4 things? And that's really the where we're going to come back to next week. Is I want to check in with you about what you might have noticed about interrupting self-shaming and moving towards self-empathy. And if anybody's had an example, I want you to notice that if you shift, notice what happens when you shift. And the other thing I just want you to reflect on is, what are the dominant cultural beliefs about self-compassion? Why do we get the message that it's such a ridiculous thing, and why would we want to spend time learning about it? If we don't identify the cultural beliefs and myths that are in the way of actually practicing it, we will deny ourselves the benefit, the individual benefit and the benefit to other people that we have when we are able to engage with self-compassion. So I'm going to leave it there so I have time to get this out to you. I hope it works. I hope you watch it, and we'll come back to all of this next week. Take care. Have a good week. Bye-bye.